Welcome to the fourth of our educational series sessions. Hopefully a few of you have been before, or if you're new, then yeah, welcome. As previous, we'll go through the presentation. The Q&A is open. I will then have a look at any questions at the end and go through those. Yeah, the aim is for this to probably be about 20 minutes, maybe slightly longer. And then yeah, we'll go through the questions. If we don't have time to go through all of them, then I'll follow up by email or likewise if you don't think of anything during the session, but something comes to mind afterwards, then you're more than welcome to kind of get in touch with us by email. So today we're looking at heart rate variability and how you can use that to assess recovery and then manage athlete training loads. It's a fascinating subject and one I kind of love looking at, but there's quite a lot to it and can be quite complex. So trying to kind of condense it all down to sort of 20 minutes was a challenge. Got some theoretical stuff in here and yeah, then some case studies as well. So you'll be able to kind of hopefully get more of a practical idea of how you can potentially utilize HRV and the quick recovery tests within Firstbeat sports. So again, this slide has been in the previous three sessions. So in case we have got any newcomers who've not been before, just a little introduction to myself. So my background is in professional football before joining Firstbeat. So again, a lot of my kind of like my examples and anecdotes will be football based or soccer based, I should say. But the general principles apply to everything. So hopefully you can still take those and apply them to your own sports. And then the agenda today, so as I sort of briefly started explaining, so we'll just go through what heart rate variability is and why it's useful, then how you can use it, monitoring your athletes, what can influence it, the benefits of using it and using it to guide your training, a little bit on interpreting, and some few points on like best practice and how to collect the data, and then a case study at the end, just of a couple of weeks data from an athlete who uses the system, just to kind of introduce it, sort of put some of the principles into a practical context. So first of all, what is heart rate variability? So some of you may well be familiar with it as a concept, but some of you maybe not. So in essence, it is the time differences between every individual heartbeat. And your heart rate is continually fluctuating. It's when you're at rest or all the time, but when you're at rest, when you're breathing in, your heart rate will very slowly speed up. And then when you breathe out, it will slow down slightly. And this is your body kind of adjusting to changes within it caused by the breathing. So it's like it's maintaining or adjusting to kind of maintain the partial pressures and blood pressure and so on within the body. So essentially, your body's constantly reacting to those little changes to kind of maintain homeostasis. So kind of trying to keep everything the same within it. Ultimately, it reflects the balance between your sympathetic, so that's your kind of fight and flight or stress branch of your nervous system, and the parasympathetic, which is your rest and recovery branch. And generally, higher heart rate variability means your body's more reactive. It's dealing with the changes faster within your environment. And so you're in a better place to kind of adapt from any training or activity that you're about to do. And in terms of using it to monitor your athletes, so obviously we're all probably monitoring our training loads and the data that comes back from training sessions, but you also need to know how your athletes are responding to that training. Otherwise, you kind of don't know, are they coping with the demands that we're placing upon them, or are they struggling to meet those demands and are gradually kind of becoming more and more fatigued over time? So it's really important where you can to kind of get a picture of that. And both physically, but also on the mental side as well. If they've got mental stress, then that can be a risk factor for injury. So the mental side and the psychological side also get captured within heart rate variability. So even if they're coping really well physically, if they are mentally struggling, that's still going to play a part in their risk, kind of risk levels for getting injured. And what that allows us to do is kind of capture or view the athlete as a whole rather than just as a sports person. So yeah, kind of considering the whole person, and we'll go into that a little bit more further on in a few slides time. And then in Firstbeat context, we have our quick recovery test, which uses heart rate variability to kind of give those insights into how our players are, what our athletes are coping with their training and life demands. And yeah, again, go into a little bit more detail on that further on in the presentation on how it's calculated and how you can utilize it. So as I've already kind of touched upon on the previous slide, there are a lot of factors that can influence heart rate variability, and that's sometimes what makes it seem a bit daunting to use, because it isn't just the physical activity side. It is influenced by an individual's genetics, then also what else they're doing in their environment, so any disease or illness, what they're eating, how well they're sleeping, their general kind of psychological well-being and stress. So yeah, it is quite all-encompassing. It does take everything into account, which is actually like yeah mentioned before, that is a good thing, because they all kind of tie in together to into like how the athlete is coping with their training. So it's not just they went out on the field, did this is what the response is. That would make life much easier if it was the case, but they are human beings at the end of the day as well. So you kind of we need to ideally have like an insight into how everything else is influencing their recovery status. So yeah, HRV kind of allows us to do that, and gives us a window into the overall picture of that athlete. Now there is individualized elements within HRV, and again, I think this is perhaps another aspect that can make it seem a bit daunting to use if you're kind of not familiar with it or haven't used it before. But if you follow like the general principles and kind of accept that there is a bit of individual variance, then that's fine. It's actually not as hard to use as you might think, and you'll learn over time how each individual responds to different things, and kind of get a picture of what's normal. So in terms of heart rate variability itself, everyone kind of has their own baseline levels, which, yeah, when you're trying to use it across a whole squad, can be tricky, which is why, well, part of the beauty of the quick recovery test within our platform, because it converts that data into the 0 to 100% scale. So although everyone has their own baselines, you're then being presented the data on an equal scale, so you can judge everyone kind of the same, pick out any outliers within your group, whether they're doing really well or doing not as well as the rest of the group. And also everyone responds differently to training. If you've got kind of quite a varied group, so depending on the sports that you play, so like for American football, you have a huge wide range of different athlete types. Then you'll probably generally see that like the more explosive athletes might need more time to recover from training sessions compared to those that are a bit more sort of steady in what they do and kind of can go all day, but at one pace rather than sort of being those more explosive athletes. In terms of the quick recovery test itself within the platform, kind of making it more usable again. So the test takes 3 minutes. So those of you that are using it already will know that. And then it filters out the best 1 minute of data. So that's data quality, not necessarily the best HRV, to kind of make the data as reliable as possible, so that you know you're going to getting the best data quality in that. And then we take into account the heart rate variability, using the root mean square sum of differences, which is basically a quantification of all the time differences across the 1 minute period. And also then the heart rate over the period as well to kind of calculate the QRT score. And then, as I said, it's scaled individually. So one player might have a baseline of 50 milliseconds, another one might have a baseline of 70. But it's factoring all of that in, and after you've done 5 to 10 tests, the data is then fully individualized based on their own. Prior to that, it will be using generic baselines, but yeah, when we're kind of discussing with customers or prospective customers alike, we always kind of explain that those first few tests aren't going to be super meaningful, but then once you've kind of done a week or 2 weeks of measurements, it becomes much more personalized and easier to use. So in terms of the benefits of heart rate variability guided training, there's a good bank of research out there now. So I've just included a couple of studies here that show when you use HRV to guide your training, you get better kind of returns on it compared to a fixed sort of pre-planned out training plan. So by that we mean on days when the athletes are presenting with good HRV, so high heart rate variability numbers, you can push them a bit more, do a bit more with them, increase the intensity, kind of whatever it is to that fits in with what you have sort of roughly planned for that period. And then on the days when they're presenting with lower heart rate variability, you adjust the sessions the other way, so back off a little bit. Reduce the intensity, reduce the volume, again, kind of depending on what you want to achieve. And that over the kind of intervention period meant that the HRV guided groups compared to the sort of the fixed plan groups always came out with more greater increases in performance by the end. That's not to say the traditional fixed group didn't improve their performance, but the HRV guided groups had greater increases. So you can kind of see on the two charts. On the top one, the white bars are the HRV guided group. So as a general trend, they had better increases in their performance compared to the solid bars, which are the predetermined training group. And then it's the other way around on the bottom. So the white bars are the predetermined training group, and the black are the HRV guided. And you can see again the HRV guided as a whole improved more than the traditional group. So yeah, essentially it's giving you that information on how they are at that particular time. So when their HRV is good, you do a bit more. When it's not good, you facilitate a bit more recovery or reduce the demands a bit to allow them to kind of catch up and get to where you want them to be, whether that's swapping out a session for recovery or just reducing the demands from it. And yeah, it can be whatever you feel works best within your context, but it is like a really powerful tool, and particularly in periods where you are trying to gain, or your primary focus is kind of gaining conditioning, then it is a good way to go. So in terms of how you might utilize that, so you're probably going to be using it alongside your training load, and then the matrix on the right of the screen kind of gives you an idea of how you might utilize that information. So when recovery is good but training load is low, then obviously that's giving you an insight that you can increase the loads or the intensities or a bit both. Whereas conversely, if recovery is low and training loads are high, and the recovery scores are low, then you clearly need to kind of reduce what they're doing. If training is high and recovery is high, then just maintain what you're doing. And then yeah, if it's at the other end, so if your recovery scores are poor and then the training loads are low as well already, then there may be some sort of underlying issue. It could be illness, it could be lack of sleep, poor dietary habits, and that's where you would potentially then like open conversations with your athlete. We've got here, like you can also utilize the 24/7 stress and recovery that we offer to kind of get an insight into how they're managing their lifestyle away from the training field. Generally, we would suggest using a 4 to 7 day rolling average for the heart rate variability, because there is an element of daily fluctuation. So if you just use a single score, it could be that that's a slightly lower fluctuation than normal. So it's better to use a rolling average alongside your training loads, because then this smooths that out, and you're then kind of judging each week or each 7 day period sort of on the same basis as before. And the case study that I've got in at the end kind of gives quite a good practical example of why that's beneficial. If you are then monitoring training or modifying training based on like a low score, or it'd be the opposite way around. If you've got a good score, then that might be that you kind of consider dropping some reps. So this is kind of an example hypothetical session plan that you might see in something like soccer or some other team sports, where you might have some technical elements early on in the session, then some small-sided games at the end. So if you've got a player that's got low HRV, maybe it's the day after a game, or just there's something else going on, you could perhaps consider that, yeah, just taking them out of a couple of reps of those small-sided games, for example. Because particularly in team sports, it's difficult to really modify a session based on one player. So if you're within your weekly cycle, you can't, or it can be difficult to say, well, this player's got low recovery, so we don't want him to train today, because obviously then he misses a lot of the tactical and technical stuff that is still likely to be fine to do. Plus, also, if you're continue trying to take players out of training sessions, it's likely to upset the sort of head coaching staff and maybe reduce the buy-in from their side. So it's not about stopping players training, but just kind of making it a bit easier for them to cope with the demand. So yeah, like this hypothetical example, you've kind of taken them out of a couple of games. Maybe they don't do the individual practice at the end, or other modifications of being so off. Like if you've got an odd number in your training group, maybe you're doing a 5v, you've got 11 players, so you do a 5v5 small-sided game and have the player with low HRV as like a middle player, so he's kind of on both teams because that reduces the physical demands for him. So that's kind of, yeah, one or a couple of examples of how you can modify your sessions. Conversely, if you've got someone who's presenting really well, got really good HRV at a point, you could maybe do a bit of extra physical conditioning at the end if your schedule allows and you're not kind of too close to game day or anything like that. So you're kind of factoring in those other elements. So moving kind of beyond the performance elements, so we said you've got to kind of remember the human. They are people as well as athletes, and you kind of need to remember that. So it's not just about collecting the numbers. Sometimes like using the quick recovery test can give you an insight into, yeah, maybe a player is struggling a little bit. There's no obvious physical reason for it, so it kind of opens that potential conversation with them. Perhaps they've just had a new child or a new baby and they're struggling with sleep, or there's something else going on that you don't know about in their life that is kind of causing significant stress. By having that conversation with them, it allows you to kind of increase and build that relationship with your athlete, show that you do see them as people rather than just a set of numbers and a set of athletic performance. And you can then help them through and kind of, yeah, again, as we sort of showed on the previous screen, potentially modify their training to help them through and, yeah, kind of ultimately maximize what you're getting from them long term. It's better to, yeah, give someone an easier session for a couple of days and then have that kind of positive reaction long term and to just keep pushing them potentially to breaking point. So in terms of best practice, this is something we get asked about quite a lot. Like how is it best to do it? And you'll probably, if you look at the research and stuff, there'll be a set of guidelines like that are considered the gold standard. So it'll always say do it laying down, do it more or less every day, do it first thing in the morning. And yeah, in an ideal world, that would be what you do, but we're not working in an ideal world, we're working in the real world. So you kind of have to make some, think what are the compromises we can make. So 3 or 4 times a week is normally a good guideline on how many to do. Within that, you might, yeah, consider where you do it. So perhaps you might do it the day or 2 days after a game. You might do it pre and post, like your heaviest sessions. So maybe on like your game day -3 or -4. And then another 1 or 2 kind of in the run into a game. So you might do it on game day -2 or 1. A lot of the time, we generally say probably don't do it on game days unless you have a real reason to. There's a lot of factors that can kind of come into those game day measurements, and again, you'll see it quite well in the example data. But like pre-match or pre-game kind of tension or stress can have quite a big impact. So where they're kind of getting hyped up for that game day, that can then reduce their HRV. So, although that's not going to have a negative effect on performance. So it's kind of that sort of stuff to keep in consideration. Try and conduct the tests in a calm environment and minimizing distractions. Seated or laying down is fine. I think seated is probably easier to manage in a lot of contexts, and as long as you're always consistent between the two, it really doesn't matter too much. And actually, in athletes who have low resting heart rate, seated is probably better because laying down can mean that their heart rate is too low, so there's almost not enough heartbeats within test period to kind of get a good variability picture. And also think about how you're kind of messaging the purpose of the test to your athletes. Yeah, because the word test can kind of put them on edge a bit. So kind of explain to them what you're doing, that it's for their, ultimately for their benefit, so you can adjust training to what they need at that point. And yeah, that you're kind of, it allows you to back off on days where they perhaps need a bit of help, a bit more rest or recovery, but also push them where they're able to cope with it. But yeah, consistency is the most important part. So if someone always does it after having a coffee, it's fine. Like kind of from a gold standard perspective, you would prefer them not to have coffee beforehand. But if they always do, then you're always judging and comparing like for like, so it's not really too much of a problem. It's when routines and stuff are varied that's then where you perhaps have to consider is it kind of getting the required level of consistency as we go through. So, yeah, so already touched upon like the communication element. Yeah, so I've sort of already answered this. Or covered these bits. We know that some customers and clients use it as part of like a wellness session. So you might have the players like doing a relaxed 5-10 minute like breathing practice or something. You can do it with headphones on if they're kind of listening to appropriately relaxing music. But yeah, work out what works best within your group and your context. But yeah, just be sure to kind of really explain the purpose of it to your athletes and how it's ultimately to their benefit. So then lastly, we've got a quick case study. So I realised we're at nearly 25 minutes already, so I'll go through this quickly. So you can see the training load and the game days are the dates that are surrounded in a square. So we can see with this particular athlete, their highest points are normally at like their post game day measurements. And that does happen. You kind of get a super compensation for some people, so they kind of present with a higher HRV immediately after a game day or a really hard session. And then you can also see on the game day the measurements they've done on game days are lower. So that's where I talked about that kind of psychological kind of hyping up sort of pre-match tension kind of phenomenon. So although they're probably in good shape, they're actually where they're kind of getting into game day mode, they're a bit lower. Their HRV is a bit lower. So that's why you potentially don't want to include game days. And also if they then do have a lower score than normal, that can then like play on the athlete's mind and then might impact their actual performance afterwards. So we can see in the case of this one, the first couple of weeks, Saturday to Saturday, are more or less comparable. But the difference comes where we've had games on the 7th and the 10th. And then the following week, we can see that the heart rate variability score depicted by the green line is actually a lot lower. So they've kind of have the additional fatigue from playing 2 games in the week of the 3rd to the 10th. So that then causes that dip, or likely causes that dip the following week. And this is why we then say to use the 7-day rolling average, because the first 2 weeks are probably going to be fairly comparable. But then when you get into that 3rd week, you would see that 7-day rolling average gradually decreasing as they move through it. So you know that they've had those two games in that middle of the 3 weeks that we've got on screen. So then you need to facilitate more recovery for that athlete. And then there's every chance that with the data going forward that we can see on screen that there would be further decreases. And you can see that so you've got the measurements on the 28th and then the 4th are both quite high, those post-game measurements, but then the 11th and 12th are quite low. And again, the one on the 18th, although it's a post-game day peak, it's not as high as the previous one. So it's kind of shows you that rolling kind of that rolling picture is more important than just the single one. So in summary, just to quickly go through what we've covered. So yeah, heart rate variability gives us a window into kind of what's happening within the body and how it's coping with the demands that are placed upon us. It's quite holistic, so it takes into account a lot of factors, but they're all important into the kind of wellness of the athlete. And yeah, like I say, psychological stress is a risk of injury as well. By using heart rate variability to guide your training, you can maximize the gains that you're getting from them, rather than just following a set predefined plan. And then, yeah, consistency in your data collection and be really considerate and careful with your communication with your athletes to explain the purpose of the testing and how or what you're doing with it. That is everything for today's session. The next one is in a couple of weeks' time. That is introducing submaximal fitness testing and in the context of Firstbeat. That will actually be with my colleague Yoel, who's doing that one. So this is the last of my ones in the current series. So Yoel will be doing the next 2. And yeah, so just going to check if we've got any questions. So just bear with me. No, there's no questions. So yeah, if anything comes to mind, then you're more than welcome to email me and I'll get back to you. And yeah, or can contact our customer care address, like either or. at any point. It doesn't have to be in the immediate aftermath of the session. Hopefully you've found it beneficial. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you in just over 2 weeks' time for the next session. So yeah, thank you.